Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As people are trickling in, I'll share a few more housekeeping notes. Like Kate mentioned, we are recording today's conversation and we'll plan to share it with you all afterwards. So you're more than welcome to forward this along to team members who you think might be interested in seeing it. And second, thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions in advance. We received lots of smart questions that we're eager to dig into, from measurement and KPIs to influencer research and vetting. So we'll get to those. But if you didn't have a chance to submit a question and still have one that you want to ask, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to be monitoring the chat and we'll answer hopefully as we can throughout the conversation. All right, so now that more people have joined, I'm thrilled to introduce you to today's Ask Me Anything panel. And as I do that, we welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat as well with your name, company, and most recent influencer-inspired purchase. So I'll start. I'm Abby Pappenfuss. I'm an influencer strategist here at Belle Communication. I've led B2C and B2B influencer campaigns for brands like True Food Kitchen and Nationwide. I also sit on the Association of National Advertisers Influencer Committee. I am getting married next month, and so my TikTok is full of wedding influencers. So I would say most recently, I've been inspired to buy heels for the big day. I've also been inspired to pay way too much for a hanger to put my dress on for pictures. And so that is something I'm not proud of, but I definitely was influenced to do. And also joining us is Kate Finley, Belle's founder.
Thanks, Abby. So hello, everyone. Looking forward to spending this time together. We're going to talk about some big picture strategy, answer those burning questions, and provide a lot of practical tips along the way. So as Abby mentioned, I am the founder of Belle Communication. That was 11 plus years ago now, which is crazy. But over the course of my time, have just been privileged to work with brands like Chick-fil-A, Shake Shack, First Watch restaurants. And it's been an honor and a joy to work with so many restaurant brands and the people like you that keep those brands relevant and thriving. So it's a challenging category. We're going to talk more about that. There's tight margins. It's a fast pace that never stops. So we have a lot of empathy coming from our corner of the world for you all. And we're really excited to dig in today on the category, how we can use influencer relations to stay relevant and drive toward business goals. So to your question about what I was influenced by recently. So the most recent one I can remember would be I purchased something that's going to sound weird if you haven't looked into it, but bovine colostrum, a supplement. It's like a powder. So hopefully it's not wigging anyone out too bad, but it's basically a whole conversation we could have about supplements, but around gut health and probiotics. And it's something I've been loving for a lot of reasons, particularly immunity. So anyway, I was influenced. Yeah, have you had that?
You'll have to spell that. I caught the name, but when you have a chance, you'll have to put it in the chat of how to spell that supplement.
It's like 4 or 5 letters, but it's a bovine colostrum. So It's like a powder that you take. But anyone who wants to follow up with me on LinkedIn, that's kind of a fun way to connect on supplements. But yeah, it was weird. But once I looked, it was like more effective than the flu shot by like 70%. I'm like, sign me up. I need all the immunity I can get while traveling. But so that brings me to welcome our third guest today. Sam Oches, the editor-in-chief of Nation's Restaurant News. And so, Sam, we are so happy to have you here. For those of you who don't know, Nation Restaurants News just released their Power 100 list around influence. And so, Sam, I would love to turn it over to you to talk a bit about that list after you tell us how did you get influenced recently?
Yeah, well, thank you, Kate and Abby and Team Belle for welcoming here. I really do appreciate it. And you know, Abby, like you in a life season, I too am in a life season, which is that I just had my third kid. Well, my wife had our third kid. I am being the dad and taking care of the older kids, of course. And so most of my feed these days is parenting stuff and, you know, funny dad humorous kind of posts because that's who I relate to, of course. So we've actually, the influencer stuff, we have bought toys and books based on the parenting influencers that we see. But as I was saying before we went live here, I am not a fashionista. I do not consider myself a fashionable person, but I'm also starting to get from the algorithm some clothes suggestion. And so really the last thing I bought based on an influencer suggestion was shoes. And my wife would have told you 10 years ago that would have been the craziest thing for me to do because I was the guy who wore a pair of shoes into the ground before getting a new pair of shoes. But I guess influencers are doing their job. So here we are. But yes, once again, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to participate in this because, as Kate mentioned, we released our power list, and every year NRN we put out the power list, which is exploring, of course, power in the restaurant industry. That list originated over a decade ago, looking straight up at power. So that was the CEOs basically of the 50 biggest restaurant companies for a long time. In time, of course, that became pretty boring because the 50 most powerful CEOs, pretty homogenous group, let's say. And also just, that's not where a lot of the activity was happening. So the list started to evolve. And the last couple of years, we've looked at general managers. Last year, we looked at general managers. The year before that, we looked at innovators. Kind of big ideas was how we framed it. This year, we wanted to know what's the hot topic of the year. And it was very obvious that to us, marketing was sort of the theme of 2024, the year of marketing. Of course, I'm sure everybody who's listening to this knows why, which is traffic is stagnant. Restaurant brands have to do anything they can to get their traffic turned around to get it positive. And marketing, of course, is one of your strongest tools in your toolbox to do that. And so when we then dug a little deeper, influencer marketing was a big part of that strategy for most restaurant companies. As myself, as entering my middle age, I'm a little cynical toward influencers, but not immune to them, as I was mentioning before. But when we started to kind of peel this back a little bit and partnered with Kate and the team at Belle to look at some of these influencers, it really did blow me away how powerful truly influencers are in the restaurant space today because of their ability to drive customers into restaurants who are interested in purchasing the things that they're learning about from their favorite influencers. So the power list came out a couple of weeks ago. We have 25 marketers and 25 influencers on this list. If you would like to check it out after this session, nrn.com/power-list, you'll find all of the folks there and dig into what makes them, in our eyes, some of the most powerful marketers and influencers that are out there today.
Awesome, Sam. Thank you so much. With that, you're kind of making a great segue here. So we want to share a couple stats with you all before we get into questions, just talking about lay of the land. What are we dealing with here? So in regard to influencer spend, 67% of global marketers plan to increase their influencer marketing budgets. More than half of those are spending such a significant portion of their marketing budgets, 25% of their marketing budgets on average on influencers. And I found it quite striking when you look at the breakdown of how they're spending this money by size. So if we're looking at, 33% are spending up to $250,000 a year and down. And then there's this segment, about 20% that are spending $1 million to $5 million on influencers. And obviously we're seeing year over year that there is a significant investment in influencer relations. And it's something that I think this conversation is going to help you sell back to your team, your C-suite, and those who you report to. I think the benefit, the opportunity that exists within working with influencers. So just a little data to help set the conversation. And Sam, I know you talked a little bit about this already, and I did in the beginning too, the margins are tight in the food and beverage and the food and restaurant space, the food service space. It's tight margins. We have inflation happening. We saw a lot of disruption in the stock market this week. Is there anything else you would add that you're seeing in the industry that you would want to share with the group here as far as, the conversations you're having as editor-in-chief?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, competition, when we start there, which is there's so much competition in the market today. Of course, in a post-pandemic climate, the market got a little screwy for a while there. We're normalizing now, but one of the ways in which the market kind of got scrambled was, of course, we saw lots of opportunity in off-premises channels, lots of opportunity in delivery and carry out, a lot of new technologies. And one of the byproducts of this was that a lot of folks rushed into the space. Virtual brands suddenly were everywhere. Ghost kitchens. Of course, we've seen that these have kind of faded out now, but I think what it served to do is it really increased this competition. The other thing too, when you talk about competition, supermarkets are competing as much with restaurants today, and part of that's because of how much prices have gone up at restaurants. Of course, prices are up across the board, but a lot of folks who are more budget conscious are turning to supermarkets, for their meals. And so a lot of supermarkets have fresh food service today. So there's just an increased competitive landscape that's out there. So not as many dollars necessarily going around as in the market share. And that technology and the just the mainstream digital ordering, third-party marketplaces, all of these tools that have gone out there have made it so that I, the customer, when I'm sitting on my couch, more so than 5 years ago, I have 1,000 options on my phone. So it really comes down to capturing the attention of the customer, communicating a value proposition, right? Because everybody's raised prices. Everybody had to raise prices. So how do you communicate value to your guests? How do you communicate that above all these other competitors, I am the one that you are going to want to come order your food from? Which again just sort of leads us all to where we stand today, this rising above all the noise, capturing their attention, demonstrating value, and how you do all of this through your marketing.
Absolutely. And I love that. That tees up the conversation just great. And actually, I want to dive right into measurement and ROI. But before I do that, Abby, I think that we wanted to do a survey or a poll.
Yeah, that would be great because Sam, Kate, what you both shared, seeing as trends in the industry is very much in lockstep with what we're hearing from our clients and from friends in this space. But we also want to take a moment and hear from you, hear about the trends that you're seeing, hear about the challenges that you might be facing. And so you'll see 3 questions here in a poll, just so we can level set about your experience with influencers and then get more macro too into the trends that you're seeing and feeling within the food service space. So if you can take just a moment here, answer some of these poll questions, we'll incorporate your responses into our conversation today. So the first question is simple. Have you done influencer marketing before? Looks like so far most of you have, but we're still seeing some answers trickle in. We also would love to know which elements of influencer marketing bring the most questions and concerns. You can choose all that apply. Measuring ROI is rising to the top, and that's where we're starting. So that's good. We'll get to that very shortly here. And then what food industry or marketing trends are you keeping your eye on or working to solve? All right, let's see. Attracting Gen Z customers right now is at the top. And that's something that Sam started to get at with what he's seeing too within his role. And what I think is really interesting about influencer marketing is how can you attract Gen Z customers or potentially new customers who have never, ordered from your restaurant before, or who might not even be aware that you exist. And you can do that through influencers. So going to spaces and communities where Gen Z is already paying attention and tapping into that influence. So those are things that we'll talk about today. All right. I think with that, we will keep it moving.
Love it. Okay. So what we're going to do, we want to start, that great update from Sam, and let's talk about the big question out of the gate: ROI, ROI, ROI. How do we do it? So how can we leverage influencers to drive tangible business outcomes? And I want to first tell you a little bit to give you a little more lay of the land. So the good news on the influencer relations front is that 92% of consumers trust recommendations from individuals, even if they don't know those individuals personally, over brands. So this should be a big alarm for you of where to focus. I like to say, even It's about perception. Perception is reality. So even if I don't know this influencer I'm following, if I view them to be like myself or aspirationally who I want to be, and whether they truly are a trustworthy source or not, and that's another conversation, but I have to at least perceive them that way. And once I do, I will buy the bovine colostrum or whatever it is that we were influenced to buy, right? And so as a result, influencer relations is very measurable when it comes to ROI. It's about strategy, which I'll talk about in a second. But we see that for every dollar invested in influencer relations, you get close to $6 back. And I think that, this is a good point to stop here when we think about how can we leverage influencers to drive tangible business outcomes. And Sam, feel free to jump in with examples as we go. But this example of McDonald's is very compelling because it was a regional campaign and it was actually about recruitment. So we talk about, oh, how are we getting foot traffic? But influencers can meet other business goals too as a tactic. So the McDonald's of New England engaged influencers to promote their workplace. How did they do this? They actually had a day where influencers dressed in McDonald's uniforms and they were employees for the day. It was a really creative campaign. Feel free to look it up afterward, but they were able to drive tangible business output like 20,000 people visiting their hiring page. So we just need to think, because a lot of you have done influencer work, think about it a little different. And what really comes into play here when we talk about measurement, you have to start with the end in mind. You need strategy before the excitement of the tactics. Why are we doing this? And what's key here is getting alignment, I would say, with your C-suite and your key stakeholders. You need to understand how they view influencers, because more often than not, there's education that has to happen to ensure that you are able to connect the dots in your strategy between what they want and view as the business goal to be achieved and what you can do with influencers. The good news is you can kind of do just about anything you need to tied back to business goals with influencers. We're even seeing on the food and food service side of things, the B2B approach to influencers works really well. Additionally, it's about what your goals are. So that's where I encourage people to start when I'm looking at outcomes, ROI. If you're trying to create a campaign that's around foot traffic, for example, that's going to look very different than that talent recruitment campaign. So just some ideas to get you thinking here. So you could use influencers to give the inside look at your brand values, your culture, what makes you unique and special. You can do things like discount codes and meal bundles and custom just collaborations and partnerships with influencers. You can shine light on how easy and convenient and how much quality and your reviews are there for your takeout and delivery experience. You can use influencers to host special events beyond just a grand opening. How about a tasting? How about a demo? Something that they can create that content with you and it can live on. And I would say that, tools come into play a lot here too when we look at building dashboards and scorecards, which we're going to talk about. But remember to leverage whatever influencer content you create throughout the entirety of your marketing channels. Don't just do a campaign and we did it and the influencer promoted it. No, you need to list it. It needs to go through your paid, earned, shared, owned channels. And so really get that life cycle from the influencer content.
And Kate, I'll just jump in for a definition. If people aren't familiar with the term allow listing, that was formerly called whitelisting, and it's when you put paid dollars behind an influencer's post and you can boost it out to a very targeted audience. And so we like to say influencer marketing is really best when it's influencer relations marrying earns third-party storytelling, that credibility with very targeted paid efforts. And so I just wanted to level set there too, in case the group wasn't familiar with allow listing.
Kate, I think this is so great. And I should also say too, I learned so much from Kate going through our powerless process, and shameless plug. There's a great conversation between myself and Kate on my podcast Takeaway with Sam Oches. If you want to follow up, there's a lot of this stuff in there too. And I was learning from Kate, but I think this is a really good point to highlight this. It doesn't have to be sales. It doesn't have to be traffic. It doesn't have to be some of these very measurable goals. Of course, you should have a way to measure the return on your investment, but I love this. And Kate, you were the first one to say this to me, that it could be your culture and your values. And of course, there's a lot of things today that restaurants are trying to solve for. Traffic's a big one, sales
Mhm.
likewise, but hiring, of course. Like, why not dive into the hiring, or dive into the influencer space to improve your hiring and your retention? But one of the anecdotes I would give is, I shared this week on my podcast feed an interview with the chief marketing officer at Jack in the Box, Ryan Ostrom. He was on the power list, and we had this great conversation about Jack in the Box and how they have tapped into influencers for their own marketing. And it's so interesting because Jack in the Box is really kind of an extreme example here, but their challenge, what they have to do constantly, is make sure Jack in the Box is in the zeitgeist. They have to be relevant. Like, relevancy is really core to their brand, because very similar to Taco Bell, they are very irreverent and quirky.
Mhm.
They have that personality that they're trying to maintain. And so influencers have helped them to really invest in who they are as a brand. And, talking about the authenticity of Jack in the Box, the influencers are helping them to communicate that. So, they rule at late night. Their late night business is great. They partner with celebrities like Snoop Dogg. Of course, what does this all mean? Well, they've got kind of this, munchies, kind of ulterior, kind of whatever vibe, and they have to invest in that. And influencers help them
Mhm.
to do that. It's harder to measure that because that's a very big kind of, brand is so big. But I loved that example that he gave of just, they find those niche influencers who are, maybe not the celebrity influencers, but
Right.
they have audiences within certain communities. They've found a lot of success on Twitch, with video gamers.
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of influencers they're looking for, who speak to those communities of these, folks who are really into the vibe of Jack in the Box, I guess you could say, and that's very authentic to them.
I love that. I think it's great. A lot of, I like the mention of Twitch too. Again, it's about why are we doing this? Who are we speaking to? So just because influencer relations is a new tactic or newer tactic doesn't mean we forego how we do marketing,
Mhm.
right? We want to remember the strategy and why, what are the objectives and what do we hope to achieve? So when you look at, how do you measure the success of an influencer program? We're talking about ROI. So some things to consider with this question. It really requires a mix of online and offline strategy and tactics. What tools are we using, which we're going to talk about? Think about things that could indicate not being so black and white and did people buy? Did they come in store? This is a lot of times a longer life cycle. And while the low hanging fruit is, did we get them to come in and purchase? That's something that, we want. Let's think about how to keep a consumer coming back time and again. So we want to think about what creates consideration and interest, things like saves and shares. How can we use promotion codes and redemptions, and what can we do to measure not only a very tight time period, but overall? So when you mentioned Snoop Dogg, I think of, okay, well, with Solo Stove, right? That was such a lesson in how to not do influencer partnerships, because there wasn't buy-in across the board. They didn't do the strategy piece and the buy-in from their C-suite first and help them bring them along and understand how long it would take to see a conversion. So just thinking about, are you integrated with your sales team? Are you using social listening tools to track mentions, brand sentiment, share of voice, things like that? We mentioned on the podcast, to Sam's point, that at Bell we have this proprietary grouping of 50 different measurement points. Some of them apply to influencers, some of them apply to PR, but really about how do we gauge sentiment, share of voice, and it's really, it's got to be something that is woven throughout your marketing. I have visual here of the full funnel impact and reporting. So this is a great visual because you have awareness through conversion. So how do we incorporate influencers within all levels of this strategy. So this is how we tend to approach it at Belle, where we're looking at, you've got your overall awareness, you're creating interest, which is where you have affinity and likability, you're creating consideration, and then we're having conversion. So it's important that we are able to speak to each of these with our C-suite, with our stakeholders to help them understand how influencers fit within each portion of our strategy.
Influencers are really like a unicorn tactic in my eyes. They can do a lot across the
Yeah.
entire funnel, and you can't say that necessarily for all tactics. And so again, this slide here just shows you how you can think of creative ways to leverage influencers to move people down the funnel. And I think this is also a good reminder that with any marketing tactic, it's going to take multiple touch points to drive action. And so that's a
100%.
really good way to think about your influencer campaigns and recognizing if you're starting from that brand building level, that awareness, how many touch points do we need to get to conversion, and what do those touch points look like if we're leveraging influencers?
To your point, Abby, I think, again, not forgetting what we already know about our
Mhm.
target markets, right? How do they act? What do they read? What do they watch? What do they attend? What's interesting to them? And then we layer that with trends, right? And so that's where you get a lot of synergy within influencer relations for sure.
Absolutely. All right, so moving to our next question. How do you determine and or find the right influencer? So first and foremost, work with creators who align with your brand values and relate to your target audience. So again, going back to the basics. So this might require some upfront introspection, making sure your brand voice, personality, and values are defined. It sounds like Jack in the Box did just that. They knew who they were targeting. And because they had that really clear focus, they were able to dive in and find the right partners. And so with that, it also requires an understanding of who your target is and what they care about. It's not always about finding the most popular online creator or celebrity. You don't need to partner with the influencer with the biggest following to have impact. It's really more, it comes down to, is this person someone who would advocate for my brand or support my brand, even if we weren't in a partnership? If you can answer yes to that question, or you think it might be yes, that's likely a sign that they're a good partner. We also recommend creating a brand specific criteria list, including qualitative metrics like an influencer niche, their demographics, and location. You can get all of that information about an influencer. You can also get that same information about the influencer's followers. And at the end of the day, that's more important because that's who you're targeting. So those are conversations you can have with influencers as you're going through and vetting partners. Ask them, hey, can you share some information on your audience breakdown so you can be very, very sure from the beginning that you're reaching the right people. It's also important to determine what performance metrics matter most. So if awareness is important in your campaign, a high follower count or reach might be worth considering. But if you have more lower funnel goals, you might need to look for things like high engagement rates and what the comments are like on their posts. Do they feel genuine? Is their audience really engaged, or does it feel a little bit spammy? Or maybe is their comment section full of other influencers promoting them? I like to reference Rival IQ. That's Rival IQ, their social media benchmark report. So that'll give you an average, show you average engagement rates for influencers and across industries. So that can be a really helpful tool if you don't have your own benchmark set up yet, to reference to see, okay, what type of engagement rate should I be looking for from influencers? What should be the goal for how these performs? How can I exceed those benchmarks in my campaign? I also like to say, when researching potential partners, don't be afraid to explore outside the traditional foodie influencer. For example, busy parents might be a great fit for a fast casual restaurant.
Yes.
Athletes, yeah, I got it. Yeah, yep.
Mhm.
Athletes could be a fit for a healthy dining option. There's budgeting influencers who might be great to promote affordable menu options. And like Sam mentioned with the use of Twitch, there's platforms beyond Instagram and TikTok that you should be considering for your campaign. So think of people who have influence both on and off social. So you might consider working with Yelp and reviewers on one of your grand openings, or think about local celebrities like well-known business owners or city council members if you're having a regional grand opening and you really want to drive, weekend traffic.
Yeah, think about too the name, image, likeness, and what that's created for like colleges. For those of
Hmm.
us here in Columbus, Ohio, anything that an Ohio State athlete does is sacred, right? That's just what I was thinking when you were saying that, Abby, which is like geographically speaking, you have a whole wealth of influencers suddenly open to you with the name, image, and likeness deals through the NCAA because college students rule a lot of college towns.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you're saying that because while we're focusing within our industry, don't stick there when you're looking at what influencers are doing. Like get inspired from other industries. To that point, we have a client that leveraged athlete partnerships with car sales, right? So like you can get really creative and thinking about influence even beyond, we were talking macro isn't even as effective anymore, more like micro and nano, but even people who are influential in their own right, and especially within B2B, that's very powerful.
And it's especially powerful when we go back to the earlier point about the state of the industry and the level of competition. And so think your competition is probably using that same foodie influencer that you're considering using. And so while we're not saying don't go down that route, think about other ways to get in front of your target in an unexpected but welcomed way.
One other thing I would throw out there too, Abby, and Kate, this might have been something you mentioned to me. Is I've heard from many others in the production of the Power List is that, I mean, we're restaurants, right? You probably have a lot of influencers who are fans of your brand. I mean, restaurants are so mainstream. This was something that Ryan pointed out at Jack in the Box. Now, Jack in the Box, of course, was such a huge presence and such a huge brand across especially the Western US. But he says they only partner with fans of the brand. Now that's kind of a luxury, but I bet you would find influencers out there who might already be posting about your restaurant. And so that's perfect because I'm sure we'll get into talking about sort of this authenticity and not forcing your creators to do anything in particular. But like if they're already a fan of the brand, half the battle's done because they're going to very authentically share about your concept.
Great point. And that's where social listening plays a role, keeping a Rolodex of brand fans, people who are actively engaging with your content, and doing surprise and delights. Even if you might be able to, send gift cards to the everyday person too, who's a big fan of your brand, and that goodwill starts to build groundswell online. So even if you can't dive right into an influencer campaign, it's still social is such a strong place to be, and there's a lot of ways to engage. So I think that's a great point. The last thing that I'll say about finding the right influencer partner is what we call the 4 R's at Belle. And so that includes relevance. So think about how will this influencer's style and content represent the brand? Reach, what relationship does the influencer have with their audience and on what platform? Resonance, how valuable is the content created? Is it well received? And risk, which is, I think, probably top of mind for a lot of brands and maybe the most important. Does the influencer have offensive content? Are their views misaligned with the brand's values? And this is a surefire checklist that we go through with each of our partners to make sure they're really right fit and feel authentically aligned with the brand. All right, next question. How do you determine the right mix of the size of influencers, particularly when on a tight budget? So we know budgets are tight this year. We know just in general, margins can be slim within the food service space. And so this is a really, really great question and really relevant. And what we like to say is the optimal mix and size of your influencers really depends on your specific goals. And so nano and micro influencers, which are those within, up to 100,000 followers, typically have highly engaged niche audiences and can be really cost effective for driving lower funnel goals like that local foot traffic or LTO sales, as we've talked about. We often find that smaller niche influencers produce the best content too, because they're so plugged into their communities. They're passionate about what they talk about, they're passionate about their followers, and they always deliver content that is valuable and resonates. They know what real people want to see, and they know what's going to drive those people to action. Macro influencers, which we say are influencers who have over 100,000 followers, can help expand brand awareness and reach, but they may be better for more national initiatives and when budgets are bigger. Because nano and micro influencers are more cost effective than macro or celebrity partners, they're strong options for regional restaurants and franchises. But we do like to make the caveat, if you are going to work with micro or regional creators, we recommend having multiple partners to maximize impact. The exact number of partners isn't necessarily, I wish we had a magic answer for that. It really does depend. For example, we've run grand opening campaigns that range from 5 micro partners all the way up to 80 nano partners. And so if you've never done influencers before, we're probably not going to tell you should partner with 80 people right away, but that shows you the scale that influencer campaigns can take. To give you an industry benchmark, the Influencer Marketing Hub, which is another great resource to bookmark, they found that 60% of brands work with at least 10 influencers for their campaigns. Again, if it's your first go around, if you're trying to create that internal buy-in, 10 influencers might be a lot to start with, but try to build your way up to that so you can really start to build groundswell within your campaigns. It comes down to, if you are on a tight budget or new to influencers, start with what you're able to do. Test and learn, grow from there, use data again to create that internal buy-in, and then you can expand your efforts after that.
And I would say too, I mean, that's the value of, I mean, shameless plug, I guess, but I think it's just the right way. Have an agency partner, and we're not saying it has to be us, but bring an agency alongside you to create that strategy and help you build out a framework that you can then go and work on your own, or you have them for a specific campaign. But don't stay in the dark on it, because there is a lot of exposure that can happen when a brand works with influencers, and Abby will touch more on that with contract negotiation. But this is all making those sorts of recommendations. You can really spend, even not from an exposure point of view, but from resources. It is so time consuming to vet influencers and determine the strategy and negotiate the contracts and manage the content and give edits to the content and all measure and all of those things. So it's really, if you are looking to grow and scale a plan, you should have more of an internal team and at least someone who is more of an expert in the influencer space.
Now, to show you another end of the extreme, one of the marketers on our power list, I'm not going to name any names here, but they said their brand works with 4,000 influencers. Now, this brand has, I think, about 800 locations. So all of you are rushing to our power list to find out which one this is. But I would wager a guess that a lot of them were local, right? I mean, if you have 800 locations and 4,000 influencers, I'm sure a part of that mix are more national or broader subject matter type influencers. But I'd wager a guess that a big chunk of them are local influencers, those nano influencers, I think, that Abby was mentioning. And now that might be a little insane and out of control. And this is a big brand with probably a pretty big budget for this. But it just shows you that, you can blow this out and go really big on that number of influencers if you wanted to. Because, again, there are so many different niches, so many different paths you can take in finding the right influencer for you.
Wow. Well, everyone, let's take a moment and send some good thoughts to whoever's managing those campaigns.
That's right.
They surely need it. But I will say, and again, I'm actually not sure which brand you're talking about, Sam, and do not know the ins and outs of their campaigns. But if I had to wager, I would say that they're probably using what we like to call self-serve platforms, where they put out a creative brief on the platform. Influencers can respond and engage. It's minimal collaboration between the brand and the influencer, a little bit more transactional. But if you're looking for sheer quantity of influencers, that could be a way to go. It's not necessarily what we recommend for our clients, but it is a way. If you're just trying to get that mass push out there, it certainly is an option to go with. All right, so then the next question. What are the best practices for working with smaller influencers who have your target demo but are not quite professional yet? So first and foremost, smaller creators can be the perfect fit for a campaign, depending on your goals and the budget you have. And if you're on the fence about an emerging creator, do a thorough review of their past content before entering a partnership. Let's
Mm.
go back to those 4 R's that we've mentioned. Is their content relevant? Are they reaching the right people? Do they resonate with the brand? Is there risk associated? Does their style and perspective align with how we want to show up as a brand? And if the answer is yes, then go for it and let them do what they do best, and that's create. That said, you can provide clear expectations and deliverables in the form of a creative brief, and you can do that up front. And don't be afraid to pick up the phone, have a brainstorm with your creator so they understand your business goals, but then you can also understand their vision for the content. The last thing I'll say here is it's important to set deadlines and review processes and other expectations in a contract with that influencer, so you're, of course, protected. And that is a good segue into this next question, which is how do you handle scripting? It feels like a fine line between getting info out and allowing for creativity. It's certainly a fine line, and that's why I love this question. It's something we talk a lot about with our partners. And what we like to say is you should be equipping your partners with the tools they need to create great content, but you ultimately have to remember that you hired them because of their creativity, their expertise, and because you trust them, and their audiences also trust them. And so consider them a business partner with valuable insights at their disposal. Influencers and social platforms are rich sources of cultural, category, and customer truths that can inform relevant campaigns. You can also take those insights from an influencer and think about how they might impact and inform the rest of your marketing mix. And so not only are you getting great content from influencers, but you're also getting some really rich audience data that you might not normally get from other tactics. The other thing I'll say here is remember that creators know their audience and platforms best. So listen to their recommendations. When content feels hyper-controlled or forced, it won't resonate nor have that third-party credibility that you hope it does. All that to say, you can and should onboard influencers with those campaign briefs that include creative guardrails. You want to be really clear on the goals and key messages so influencers can incorporate that direction into their posts. And we actually hear from our influencer partners quite often that they appreciate and like having those briefs. They like having the brainstorms and discussing the business goals in advance because that direction really helps to set them up for success, and they want to be good partners to you. It also is great because then you're giving them all the information they need to pass on to their audience. And at the end of the day, they want to be of value to their audience. The one other caveat I'll add here is that if you're in a partnership with a creator, you're trusting them, you're letting the process happen, but then you're finding the content is coming back and you really need to micromanage it. Take a beat, think about, is this partner best fit for us? You might need to fulfill the contract with them, but think about, will they be a good partner ongoing? That's part of the process too, is testing and learning who are really right fit partners, not only by the content they produce, but also by how the relationship is with them. So there's a lot of learnings that can happen within the content creation stage. Okay, what are the best tools available for finding, vetting, running engagement rates, and what other tools can be helpful for contracting and negotiating with influencers? So
Big one.
what was that?
I said it's a big one, and I'm thinking just to your last point about content before we go here is just where we've seen brands use influencers to create content for them, and they might not even use them as an influencer, right? They're just such dynamic content creators where they can use them, and maybe we'll talk more about this, but internally to bring your brand values and what's unique about you and your company and your people and bring that out through content instead of having those resources in-house because they do it in such an authentic way. And to this point, excited for this piece of the conversation. I think we get those questions a lot around tools, and we have had, there is so much time in negotiating contracts. That's one of the biggest as far as time commitment. Abby, what would you say? Like, is that pretty significant? Because I feel like we're constantly negotiating contracts back and forth between the client and the influencers.
Yeah, I would say surprisingly, and maybe not so surprisingly, contracting and negotiating is the biggest time commitment of the campaign. And that's largely because even emerging and micro creators have talent managers today.
Mm.
Influencers are very much an industry, a profession now. And so they're starting to equip themselves with teams around them, and those teams are savvy, which is great. But that also means that there's going to be a little bit more back and forth when you're finalizing what the terms are, what the deliverables are, what the payment is, all of those fun details.
It's really interesting to try to figure out too, what is the value to them. I mean, I think this is
Mhm.
from my own perspective. As in the wake of the powerless, we've been engaging with influencers to do Instagram live conversations and to invite them to come to some of our events. And this is the first time we've gotten into this, so I'm learning on the go here. But some of it is, of course, there's a financial component. But I think to your point, Abby, they're savvy business leaders at this point, and they're also looking for other value. I don't think it's just the financial value, right? Because remember, you're aligning your brand with them, but they're aligning themselves with your
Yes.
brand. So I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of exploration that happens here, and a more obviously there's so much more leverage on the side of the influencers now, depending on the influencer that you're partnering with, that it's exploring what other kind of value can you give them. Now, I've never negotiated a contract for a restaurant with an influencer, so call me crazy here. But again, what's value beyond financial that you can offer them, I think would be kind of interesting. Now, I don't know what that is. Maybe you give them gift cards. I don't know. But I think the point is like they are looking out for their best interest. They're very protective of their image and their audience. And so I do think what I've learned here is that you've got to kind of navigate that as you demonstrate the value that your brand can bring their brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we really like to call it influencer relations over influencer marketing. And we're taking a play out of the PR book. And that's really thinking through how is this relationship mutually beneficial? Because it does go both ways. You're both kind of cashing in on each other's cachet, if you will. And so I think that's another important consideration. I'll throw out a few tools for you all to write down for consideration. And then the next question is specifically around payment. So we can dive in deeper there, Sam. But we have explored and vetted many tools throughout our company's history. And we found that platforms like Tagger and Creator IQ are great starting points for vetting performance metrics. However, if those tools or if agencies are outside of your budget, you can install plugins like the Influencer Searcher Engagement Calculator. That's a mouthful. Influencer Searcher Engagement Calculator. And that can pull Instagram engagement rates when searching on your desktop. So that's kind of a quick and dirty way to get a relative sense of what an influencer's engagement rate might be. And then you can also ask influencers as well. They have all of those metrics at their disposal. So if you're reaching out to them, they're more than likely going to share a media kit that includes their performance metrics and past case studies. And those tools that I mentioned, Creator IQ and Tagger, they have built-in outreach and negotiation features. We often like to take the negotiation off the platform because it helps to really build a relationship. You want the relationship to be built on trust. And yes, you're negotiating business terms, but you want them to feel comfortable with you and vice versa. So we find it's better to build that rapport off the platforms when you're doing that. And then the last thing I'll say about influencer contracts and negotiating is work with a legal team. So everything we're sharing today is not sound legal advice. It is from our experience, but it's really important to get that counsel from legal teams and to create a contract with a legal team backing it. And so it's just really important to do that because contract should be very, very specific and outline things like the specific deliverables, FTC disclosure requirements, exclusivity terms, usage rights, approval process, things like that. And your lawyer or your agency's lawyer can really help you navigate that. And because what you put in that first contract sets precedent. So you want to make sure you're getting it right from the jump.
Yeah, that's definitely when you think of a crisis, your crisis PR hat, right? You want to make sure you're, in some cases, you're spending six figures on these influencer relationships. When you think about now, am I going to pay them? How am I paying them? How often am I paying them? Am I paying them up front? What do I need before I pay them? Really thinking about the exposure. What if the influencer goes off the rails, right? We're in a political climate. There's a lot of things happening. People are following their values, their personal set of values, and they might alter when you work with them, right? They might have started with the similar values and now they're wanting to make statements online. So all of these things need factored into your contracts and negotiations.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that does lead us into this next question. So how do you determine what is fair regarding trade/payment to both the influencer and the brand? So today, in general, monetary compensation should be the default. That hasn't been the norm in the restaurant space, but it certainly is best practice today. That amount of compensation can vary, and that would depend on things like the influencer's reach, the engagement, their credibility in the industry, the amount of deliverables you're asking from them, what type of production or commitment is required. So all of those things can be factored in. And the other thing that's important to note here is that solely offering free meals or products in exchange for posts is discouraged. Again, influencers should be compensated with money for their time. But to Kate's point about how influencers can go off the rails, they have a platform which can be really great for promoting your brand. It can be a really positive thing, but they can also use that platform to talk negatively about your brand. There's sites today like #PayMe, and then my personal favorite, FU Pay Me, which sounds really scary, but influencers are talking about what brands are paying them, and that is starting to trickle up into news headlines, and so it all becomes a risk management component. So if you're going to do influencers, make sure that you're setting aside some sort of compensation. Again, it doesn't need to be large, it doesn't need to be that $600,000 to start, but that's always important to consider in campaigns. And that leads to this very exciting guide. And if you have more questions on compensation, we highly encourage you to check out ANA's Influencer Pay Equity Guide. This guide was created by ANA, the 4As, and PR Council to address the 27% racial pay gap between white and BIPOC creators and brands of all industries such as Nationwide, Unilever, Target, and more contributed. Belle and other agencies also supported. So it really is a meeting of the minds and shares, different perspectives, again, across industries and groups of people, with the goal to close this pay gap and help marketers navigate compensation and negotiations. Although the guide does not include this next slide, but I know everyone's thinking it. Okay, that's great. We'll look through the guide, but how much are we paying people? And so at Belle, we like to compile and audit rates received from influencers and their managers. So what you see here is what we're seeing on average for micro influencer rates, and this is collected over hundreds of influencers and talent agencies.
Love it. Yeah, this guide is something that is very near and dear to our heart. Pay equity is very important to us at Belle, and I will just call Abby out. She's such an advocate for pay equity and contributed so much to that guide. Okay, so we have a couple more questions here, and I think we can fit them in the time. So here we go. Okay, so with that update, we talk a lot about let's see, how to take an influencer program from a one-off, maybe reactive or experimental phase to ongoing brand ambassadors. And we've touched a little bit on this already because we're talking about which influencers might work best based on how their content performs. but really just shifting toward a long-term, mutually beneficial relationship is the ideal from our perspective and experience that focuses not just on those individual campaigns, but ongoing engagement and brand representation. So some ways to do this. Abby mentioned one of them already, but look at the content, the look and feel of the content, the performance of the content. Really be thinking as you test out influencers, which ones could you have ongoing partnerships with? Use the best performing content in digital ads, pushing it to a wider audience. Ask your creators for ideas. As they get to know you and your brand better as you work together, they're going to have more creative, outside of the box, and really brand centric ideas. It's hugely beneficial. And then something that is underestimated in the partnership, and I think Sam mentioned this earlier, but they have their own businesses. A lot of these people are entrepreneurs and they're trying to grow and scale their business. So how can you as a brand find like-minded influencers and really come alongside them and look for it to be an opportunity? What's in it for them, right? How could you be creative in creating sponsored content, co-branded product lines, really thinking outside of the box? And yes, we can say some of these ideas, but the most creative and most impactful ideas are going to come from getting in the weeds, going shoulder to shoulder, and brainstorming with your influencers. So what types of influencer partnerships work best for restaurants? We have seen it's really just a mix. It's not just one tactic. So you have a mix of sponsored content, long form brand ambassadors, you have the one-off campaign opportunities, you're creating content and user-generated content, UGC campaigns. Those tend to be the most effective, these few that I mentioned. Sponsored posts tend to drive immediate awareness. And then those ambassadors build the long-term affinity for the brand, the ongoing partnerships. And then user-generated content tends to leverage influencers to create, like I said earlier, very relatable, authentic content. And so the last question here, I think we'll have time for, and we can just maybe sit here for a minute or two. How do you navigate using fun and viral trends, like tapping into those, getting Gen Z's attention, for example, while still remaining professional, while still having a legal team? How do we balance this? And so I guess just starting off, I would say you're not alone. This across the board, every industry, all of our clients are facing these challenges. There was a HubSpot survey that we pulled for this, and around 28% of marketers report facing this challenge. I would venture to guess that that's old and there's probably even more concerned about it now. But first and foremost, you want the strategy just like you would any other like PR strategy, right? What are we comfortable speaking to? What don't we want to speak to? What aligns with our brand values? And similar to a crisis plan, consider mapping out what types of trends are you comfortable speaking to as a brand? Which ones are you not? For example, we have a client that was actually mentioned in association with the restaurant client, mentioned with Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, and it was a last minute, oh my gosh, this just happened in the moment. What do we do? They just ordered our food and it's going viral online. How do we tap into it? And for that brand, it was an exercise of being really nimble and trying to pull together their legal team, their marketing team, their comms team, all of these different partners. So the more that you can do that in advance, the more nimble you'll be able to be in tapping into these trends. So I think that's really, that's my initial advice. I guess Abby or Sam, I'm curious how you would comment here.
That reminds me of the Pharrell hat for Arby's. I don't know if you guys remember that. That's 10
Yeah.
years ago, I think now. And he wore a hat to the Grammys, I believe it was. And everybody on Twitter commented it looks like the Arby's logo. And Arby's very expertly swooped in and picked that up and ran with it. And it was everywhere. I mean, it was gold. And I believe that hat is at Arby's headquarters today. I mean, it's enshrined for them. But I think to the point you're making, Kate, was that nimbleness. Of course, having a team of people who are very closely watching the conversation and picking up on that, because if Taylor Swift dines at your restaurant and you don't immediately jump on that, you just miss the biggest opportunity. I mean, another one, look at Applebee's in their Walker Hayes Fancy Like a couple years ago. Another one, I mean, that won marketing awards.
Yeah.
All they had to do was respond to a singer who sang a lyric about Applebee's. But I guess the point is if you're not listening, you're not going to hear it, right? Like just listen, and whatever is said, then you pick up and run with it, and make sure you're on top of that. You've got a team of people who can really be nimble and respond.
Absolutely. And we're at time. So that is a great segue into this plug. And this is if you're interested in hearing more from us, you are very interested in staying on top of those trends, staying in the know. We have what we call our Think Big blog, and that is full of bold brand moments from each month, industry insights, and all things measurement and goals. So you can sign up for that here. And don't forget to also check out the Power List. That is also full of inspiration and ideas for your next campaign. And the last thing I'll say is if you are interested in direct help from Belle, we'd love to connect. So you can visit bellecommunication.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Abby Pappenfuss, and you'll see that we offer skilled support for influencer marketing campaigns from coaching all the way to end-to-end management. And with that, that's a wrap. So
Oh,
thank
that
you
was
so much
fun.
for joining us.
That
Thank
was
you
fun.
all for attending so much. This was great. Sam, thanks for your time. Thank you,
Thanks
Abby.
for having me.
Bye all.
Bye, everybody.